Welcome to the most recent episode of The Fog and the Whirlwind. I'm joined today by a blogger and political commentator. He is on X under at PA Bowler Dude. Instagram is NRx Enthusiast. And also, you need to go look him up on Substack. Search Gutter Balls there by State Champ Bowler Dude. By the way, guys, there's links in the description, so don't worry about if you're having a hard time finding it. And he joins me now. NRx Enthusiast, thanks again for coming back on.
Hey, thanks for having me as always, Josh.
Okay, let's begin with something that you wrote that I really got a lot out of, and the audience will as well. You wrote an article here that I want to bring up on screen a little bit. Pragmatists versus hardliners. The right wing vanguard has split into two distinct groups. And I'm going to read a little bit of it here for our audience. I've been throwing around a bunch of different descriptors for what I called in my title the hardline right, but I can't figure out any that I love. I'm open to suggestions. What I'm referencing in my title is the current disagreement that has effectively split the dissident right, or anti establishment right, in two distinct camps. This split had existed, but was exacerbated after Donald Trump returned to the Oval Office in January of 2025. The split had previously taken other forms and centered around whether one was skeptical or concerned about Trump's sometime cozy relationship with Israel and its lobbies, and most supportive politicians, and also those who disagreed over whether or not to countersignal Trump, Vance, and other key MAGA figures. What I call the pragmatic right, of course, which I tend to be a part of, though I sometimes see merits in the concern of the hardliners, does generally not obsess over Israeli and Jewish influences over the American government. We would rather not be involved in Middle Eastern affairs, but don't hyper focus on word or action that Trump says or does pertaining to that part of the globe. The pragmatists want Trump to effectively wield executive power to make life better here in America, particularly for heritage Americans who have been under attack from the left and mainstream right for years, particularly in the form of replacement migration, job outsourcing. And I have some other screenshots here. Yep. And let's see, reverse discrimination, job outsourcing. FYI, it's just plain discrimination as a result of civil rights legislation. Pragmatists were very much in favor of the signing of the BBB simply because of the massive funding hike for ICE. Sure, they didn't love all the usual pork that goes along with huge bills, but understand that Trump, the consummate deal maker, had to include enough little juicy nuggets to entice all but two Republican representatives to go along with it. Understanding the reality of the current political situation, further inflating the deficit, was more than worth intensifying the battle against illegal immigration. A common refrain from this camp is that America can come back from a financial crisis, not a demographic one. Hardliners seem to live and die with every single word and decision coming from the president and his administration. So, real quick, I wanted to discuss this with you because I will say, and I said this in the prep a little bit, I think we're very sympathetic. I would also put myself pretty firmly in that pragmatist camp as well. Though, like you said in the article, I definitely listen to some of the hardliners and see some level of merit in things that they say. But I really liked what you pointed out with a lot of these hardliners living and dying by everything that Trump says. One thing that I think is important for the audience to know is that you oftentimes have to take what Trump posts on Truth Social, especially, with a grain of salt. And so, with this article in mind, I think it's important to look pragmatically at Trump's term so far. And so, real quickly, I guess you can do this either out of 10 or you can give him a letter grade, A through F. How would you grade Trump's administration so far, NRx Enthusiast?
Um, I think you could break it down into a few different. I mean, if you want to give it an overall, I would say like a solid B plus to A minus. Immigration has been really strong from what I've seen, especially with the big beautiful bill and the ICE funding, and then the fact that he's already been, there's already looks like there's already been some serious movement in terms of the deportation effort. Um, I'd be curious, like once we actually see some statistics, then again, I feel like any statistics that come out of, how many illegals or how many deportations, it all has to be taken with a grain of salt. Um, but at least optics wise, and at least from what the overall feel of everything is, it looks like things are going pretty well in that arena, and that's the real big one. Um, as for everything else, it's not necessarily on the forefront of every American's mind, but like I would have hoped for a little bit more. If we're being, if we're going to nitpick, I would have hoped for like a little bit better foreign policy. The strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities doesn't seem like a real big deal. Although, as as it says in my article, that's like one of the things that the hardliner contingent seemed to be very, very much like, oh, here we go again. We're all want to die for Israel. Like, the same thing you hear every time. And it seems like nothing's really come out of that. And it also, there's still, I'm not sure what's going to happen with the Ukraine Russia situation. Looks like Trump is, there's a meeting with Putin supposedly coming up pretty soon. And I'm generally optimistic when it comes to Trump's foreign policy and his handlings with other foreign leaders. I feel like I have reason to be optimistic there. Other than that, it's kind of been overall what I've expected. Minus maybe, I would probably argue the immigration stuff has been better than expected. Definitely better than it was in his first term. Because I think he's at least learned from some of his mistakes and some of his dealings with, the permanent DC bureaucracies that fought him every step of the way back during the 45 administration. But yeah, back to your original point. I was kind of rambling there, but back to your original point, I would say like B+ to A-.
How much of this do you think is that you're not so upset, and neither am I, because our expectations were not through the roof for him?
Yeah, and I don't think they can be. I mean, if it depends on what your measuring stick is. Um, there's so many people that think that like Trump has to be this, like you have obviously the wackos that like think that he, wish he they wish like literally wish he was like the next Hitler. Which at no point was that ever going to happen or is going to happen. But you have a lot of people that think that like, oh, Trump was only a good president if he, completely remakes America and basically turns us into like a, completely gets rid of every single, non-white immigrant. Like it is very unrealistic. What a lot of people are saying, but I think part of it also is like people who, like, I think like we were even talking about last night, the people that want to be right, that just like to black pill because they like to be able to say, oh, I was right. I'm not going to let myself be disappointed. Like I'm just going to have the most low expectation, or I'm either going to have unrealistically high expectations that will never be met, and then I'll be able to say, oh, my expectations weren't met, and I can black pill. Or the ones that just say like, oh, every single president's the exact same. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. Voting doesn't matter. Um, it's just Israel owns everybody. Um, Yeah, I think you and I are more, for better or worse, you have to use, you have to use the executive power where, for better or worse, our system of government allows for the kind of crap that's been going on, like with rogue judges. It allows, Trump to, you know, pass, sign, whatever executive order or pass some sort of bill. And then obviously you have some liberal judge, stopping it at every turn. And our system allows for that for better or worse. And, after that, it's just like, yes, it's what's the Andrew Jackson line, like the courts have made their decisions, let them enforce it. Like that has to be the attitude.
I like the line you had just now about what is the measuring stick. And it's funny because there's a guy and he's a libertarian economist. He's not really one of our guys. I don't really listen to him anymore, but I did when I was a libertarian. And he was always asking the question, compared to what? You have to ask yourself, okay, because this is the thing. A lot of people, either on the dissident right or other spheres of the internet, will say, well, this is just copium or just coping to say, well, if you had had Harris, there would have been zero deportations. When in reality, one of the two was going to be president. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, like you could make a really good case and say that Trump's been the best president of our lifetimes, but at the same time, you could also say, well, the bar was pretty low. Um,
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure. I mean,
every
look at Biden.
president, whether or not every president, whether or not they came in with like good, like good motives and came in with like for the right reasons, every single one of them had to deal with, a massive bureaucracy and had to make concessions to donors that these donors who have the kind of money that you can have to affect politics at that level aren't necessarily the kind of people that are going to be aligned with your normal American. Like it's just it's built in.
And I think that, and the thing is, too, a lot of people, and it's funny because I haven't even read anything from Gray Mirror recently, but I remember there was a quote from Yarvin a while back that so much of American politics is a sugar rush. It's all about,
Yes, I remember that.
yes, it's all about what's going on right now. And what people need to be focusing on, instead of the milk, they need to be looking at the actual meat of politics and current events and what's really going on. And that's part of the other problem is so many people seem to have an idea, they at least seemed to, past tense, going into the 2024 election. Some of them seem to think that Trump was going to get in there and change everything, when really and truly it's not going to get overturned. Progressivism, as a squid with its tentacles everywhere, is not going to be killed in 4 years. And Trump hasn't even been in his full 4 years yet. He's only been in for a
Not
little
even a
more than
year.
6 months. Yeah, it's been 6 months and a little bit more than that now. So, with that being said, I think that's part of it. Is our expectations were lower of him. You and I are very much men of the right, but we weren't expecting him to just fix so much of this stuff. I would tend to agree with you. I think on immigration, he's doing a really good job overall. Some of the Truth Social posts that he had out there about, oh, we're not going to deport farm workers, sounded concerning, but the same guy, Walter Block, that I mentioned earlier about the compared to what quote, he
Yeah,
one time said this about Donald Trump. He said, if Donald Trump was a football player, he wouldn't be a quarterback, he wouldn't be a wide receiver, he would be a broken field runner. Because what does he do? He runs this way, then he runs this way, and then he ends up going the direction that he wants to go.
yeah.
And that's
That's a good
pretty
analogy. Never heard that, but
accurate.
that's a good analogy.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good analogy because a lot of times Trump says a lot of stuff, and really I think it's helpful for people to whenever they see a statement from Trump or a tweet or a True Social post, just say, okay, that's what he said, but let me watch what he actually does.
He's been that way ever since he's been in politics.
Yes. And people forget that. That's part of it too. I think you and I, with our analysis, we understand that. And some of these people, all they see is a tweet or a video and they think, oh, well, it's just over.
And in fairness to a lot of these people, I will say there are a handful of people who are like the complete opposite side, where they think that like literally everything Trump does is some sort of calculated like 4D chess.
Right.
And you just have to trust the plan, bro. Like you've seen that too. But I mean, honestly, I think reality is probably closer to that than it is like, oh, you just have to take everything at face value, and he's just another puppet of the regime.
I do think there was a lot of overreacting to the MIGA tweet, MIGA, which was make Iran great again. Trump was talking about how I think he's
I think he did. Did he mention Did he actually use the term regime change at one point?
Yeah, he said everyone's talking negatively about regime change in Iran, and I think he tried to say that the deep state doesn't want regime change with Iran, and we need to make Iran great again. And everyone, felt like everybody, including some people that I really like, got very upset. I was upset, but I told the audience Trump is probably going to do some strikes, maybe some Air Force or some drone strikes, and he's probably going to be done after that, which is what happened in Syria in 2017.
Yeah,
And yeah.
I've maintained like the people who say that like Trump's going to start World War III, or I mean, well, you have like your deranged lefties that say that, but then you also have the people. You have like the Groyper types that are like, oh, we're just going to die for Israel and fight in all these Zog wars. It's really like that's not based on any patterns. It's just blackpilling. It's just delusional blackpilling. It's not based on anything. It hasn't been. Trump was the one guy that didn't start any new wars, during his first presidency. And honestly, if we're being honest, I think almost in his first term, he was kind of like a victim of his own success in a way. Because when he first got in there, I remember, this is a little bit of a tangent. I remember in like 2015, 2016 that like ISIS was a big deal. And, there was enough, I don't know how many little terrorist attacks here and there. And then there was like, the big terrorist attack in Paris in 2015. And that was something that was on everybody's mind at the time. And, Trump came in and pretty much like after a few months of his administration, you never heard anything about ISIS. Like he pretty much like went after them. And like I said, it almost made him like a victim of his own success. Because by the time like 2020 rolled around, obviously 2020 was its own animal, but by the time that all rolled around, everybody had forgotten about all that stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
I think like obviously he's not going to have to go up. He's not going to have to run again because it's this is his second term. But let's say Vance is running in 2028, and if they knock all this crap out right away, the American voter, which love my fellow Americans and everything, but there's a lot of just you can't that's and that it goes back to my general criticism of democracy is people only see the shiny toy that's in front of them, and they're going to forget about the things from 4 years ago.
Right, and my point is that they have. I mean, regarding Trump in Syria, I think this is again part of our expectations. We voted for Trump in 2024, knowing that there were things that he did in 2017, 18, and 19 that let us down, and of course in 2020 he did too with the whole Operation Warp Speed. But
Well,
we
and I
did
would
that.
even I would even say with when they bring up Operation Warp Speed, I don't even look at that as like him. Sorry to cut you off there, but I don't even look at that as like Trump doing something bad, because I don't think Trump would have ever mandated people like would have ever mandated the vaccines. I mean, obviously, yeah, the vaccines seem to have some. Yeah, there's good reason that a lot of people decided not to take them, um, and it seems that there are some issues with them, but I at least think that even if Trump would have gone through with did the warp speed thing, that I don't think he would have ever mandated them.
Yeah, I don't bring it up much. I was just sort of talking like the way they usually talk. These people were referring to.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but you and I knew this, but we still made the calculated decision. Well, the pros outweigh the cons,
yes,
and as a result, even though he did order some strikes, which you and I would disagree with, he did it in his first term too, and so we're not really surprised by it. He's a boomer age man, maybe a little bit of an older boomer age man that is not going to do everything we want him to do, but it's not to say that we're okay with everything he does. Again, like you said earlier, I appreciate the fact you brought up there is a part of maybe you could say MAGA, but more broadly, just Republican Party politics who Trump can just do no wrong. If you criticize him, you're a liberal. It's kind of like with the Groypers. If you disagree with Nick Fuentes, you're Jewish, and if you disagree with Trump, with these Republican types, then you're a liberal.
yeah,
And the concept of disagreeing with Trump bombing Iran is like, well, that means you're just some peacenik anti-war liberal. When the opposite is true, we're actually America first on our foreign policy and to the right of Trump. But we still are not going to, make a bigger deal out of it than it is because, as you referred to earlier, he actually ended up kind of closing that situation down, and there's been at least a little bit of peace between Iran and Israel, and America's been a little bit less involved, which is great. I would say, and I want to get your thoughts on this too. The worst so far, the scariest, is the stuff going on with Epstein because it's just unexplained. Because Trump talked about before he got into office, he did express that he thought that Epstein killed himself, which surprised a lot of people. He said that on Tucker Carlson's show. But then as time went on, he also said he would do things like declassify or release the Epstein files. And now he's acting like these files are unimportant that Epstein was just a creep. And the whole thing sounds like it's being shelved, if not hidden.
yeah.
And it's very possible that the investigation is going to happen. He's just not. He's trying not to telegraph that. But I want to hear your thoughts on the whole Trump versus Epstein thing.
Yeah, it's. I feel like he's been put into a position that there's no matter what, there's not going to be really any perfect solution, because you know I'm sure with the way he's acting, I'm sure his name comes up in some way, shape, or form in there. And if you just go, if you just go in saying, "Oh, I didn't do anything wrong," yada yada yada, like people are going to think that you're guilty anyway. You know what I mean? Um, so I think there's at least some aspect of that. Trying to think of how, like, what's like the best way to say it. I just think he's in kind of a no-win position.
I think
Um,
that it's important to reserve judgment until he gets out of office. Because I would not be surprised at all if in a year or a couple of months something comes out with the DOJ or with the FBI and people get something about Epstein and Trump will probably say something about it. He may just kind of, at a press conference, just kind of shrug and say, yeah, the guy was a creep and a weirdo, but it's very possible that there is an investigation going on still. And until he gets out of office and nothing has been done, I remain optimistic that more is going to be done, because I think that part of the intelligence of Trump is that he tries not to telegraph to the left what he's going to do, unless he can do it in such a way where he sets them up for failure. I'm not saying
Yeah.
it's all chess, but I think that there are times Trump is playing chess. Just because we
Oh, there
don't
are.
buy into the logic of, oh, it's all chess, man, doesn't mean that Trump is never playing chess.
Yes, I agree. And I would also add with the Epstein thing that the if there's any real big mistake, and I don't even know if you want to call it that big of a mistake, but any like weird like head scratcher was when he had like all the like MAGA influencers there with the files, like almost like it was some sort of like a photo op. Remember that he
Yeah.
had like DC Drano and like the rest of those like like just like mainstreamish MAGA
Yeah, I agree that
mouthpieces.
it looks weird, but it's hard to know how much of that is Trump setting that up or coordinating it, and how much of it is, I don't know what you want to say, the Republican Party
Somebody else, yeah.
con Inc. Yeah. So, I
Or
mean, Trump played into it, sure, but I don't necessarily blame him for that.
yeah, it was weird though to say the. I mean, I think it was
Sure.
weird. I didn't quite understand what the point of that was.
Well, as a result, it definitely makes me want to trust DC Drano less. And
Yeah,
people
I
like
mean, I
that.
was already kind of getting there after just like his. I mean, just generally, and it's like these like MAGA influencers. Like a lot of these guys, like they, I directionally agree with them on most things. Um, but yeah, I think there's still a lot of like residual, like just kind of conservative, like the like our type of politics, like what do you call it, like dissident right or the new right or whatever. There's still a lot of like residual like boomer conservatism that still has a lot of power
Without a
and
doubt.
still has a lot of influence. Like if you look at like even if you look at like even on Twitter or Instagram, like you see so many pages of like accounts for say like DC Drano or any of those other like more well-known like mainstream accounts, like they have like way more followers than say like some somebody who's like in the more like reactionary, like even like Aaron McIntyre or someone like that. Like I think he's got a good amount, but it's not like there's so many of these like influencers that have like a million followers, and it's like, who is this person? Like, have they said anything useful other than just like, oh, like boo Democrats,
Yeah, I agree. I do wonder about foul play when it comes to the Twitter numbers, and also
Yeah.
if there's a certain reason why they are being promoted to
Yes.
maybe get influence over the younger generation. Maybe it's younger and older. But I agree. I wonder about that for sure. I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on Vance's role in this? I think it's probably pretty reasonable to think that if Pence were vice president right now, it's very possible that he would have been in Trump's ear during the whole Iran situation, saying, we are going to need to go in there and invade. I do think it's very possible that J.D. Vance has been a voice of reason when it comes to an America First foreign policy. Do you think that's fair to assume?
Yes, I agree. I don't know if I mean, yeah, maybe Pence would have been someone pushing Trump a lot harder if he were still in there. I frankly don't. I mean, I wonder how often that during the first administration, how often Trump deferred to anything Pence said. Because I thought, he was good on certain things. Um, but yeah, as time's going on, you can see he's one of those just Republican Party holdovers. But I've liked a lot about Vance, and I do hope that the overall that the the right wing in America, or the GOP, tends more in that direction. And that people like Vance are the future.
Hopefully, it's certainly better than the alternative that we've
Yes.
had. Let's look now that we've talked some about Trump's overall first term. I didn't even mention this in the prep. Well, maybe I did by text message. What do you think about 2026? Do you think that, would you say, because I think I see a lot of chest beating. A lot of Republicans, especially these influencers you're talking about, are like, yeah, the Dems are down and we're just going to sweep the midterms. And I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I think that it's very much up in the air. What are your thoughts on 2026 and how it's going to play out?
No, I would say it's up in